We want to know what's important to you.
So again, don't miss us
on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show.
We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and it works. We're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. It's every Thursday. Tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you, and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Gary Gibbons.
Well, happy 4th of July, America, our 250th celebration. And welcome back to the Voice of Reason. I'm Gary Gibbons, joined today in the Tan Talk studio as my co-host, attorney, and former circuit judge, Kevin Carey. Welcome,
nice to be
Kevin.
here with you, Gary, as always.
Well, it's a great weekend, a lot of celebrating to do, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. In the second hour of our show, we're going to be talking with the producer of The Cross and the Saber, which is a new play from the Lab Theater that's in Ybor City in Tampa, which is opening tonight. And more on the topic we can simply never seem to complete because it continues week after week, the recent antics of the Trump crime family. So
it does not only does it never end, it just gets worse.
And now it's in full display because of the disclosures that he filed this week. So we'll talk more about that. But I really want to get to what, because we're both lawyers, I want to talk about what the Supreme Court did this last week. And, the term of the Supreme Court runs from October to June. And thankfully, it's over for the current year because this is the most politically activist Supreme Court in our country's 250-year history. The Supreme Court has unquestionably established itself as a full activist partner in implementing the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. That's the one that Donald Trump famously said he didn't know anything about, but now they've passed about 53% of all of the things that were in Project 2025. But who knows everything about Project 2025? That's Russell Vogt, who's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, who, with the assistance of the heavy political hand of Chief Justice John Roberts and his 5 Republican majority justices, they're systematically transforming our government into something that our founding fathers wouldn't even recognize.
And, we're going to jump, I know, into some very detailed discussion of some of these cases. And it is, unlike, I used to think the Florida Supreme Court would rule every year too. I remember waiting 3.5 years for a decision, unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, the state one. Just for those of you who practice, it may be years and years, but at least, as you said, it's ended for the year for the U.S. Supreme Court, which does not have a particularly heavy docket, but it certainly is. I would agree with you, Gary, that it's become an activist court. You look at it, you've got 3 progressives, Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan, who are basically primarily right dissents. You've got Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, who I think would probably do anything. There's nothing that Trump or his administration could do, however illegal, complete lack of any, and we'll talk about this in more detail with some of these cases, complete lack of respect for precedents. It's, though our viewers and listeners may not recall, but these folks all have to come before the Senate Judiciary Committee and pledge under oath that they're going to honor precedent. Then you've got the Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett somewhere in the middle, although I think, frankly, to me, Alito is pretty much Roberts' bag man when he has to get too nasty. Alito writes the opinion. Let me just say, as an aside, Alito came from Sicily. There's big anti-immigration. We don't want these immigrants coming here from these rough countries. When Alito's forefathers came here, they came from Sicily, which was a rough, dangerous country. So it's a good thing
his parents were immigrants from
exactly.
Sicily.
So to the standard held today, his family would never have come here because that Sicily was really a mean, violent country back then. But you get Thomas writing a 90-page dissent on this, I believe, on the birthright case. That, by the way, about 255,000 children a year are affected by that, and we'll talk more about it in detail. But the fact that that was not a 9-0 is a disgrace when it's expressly set forth in the Constitution that anyone born in this country is a U.S. citizen. Not every country has that, but we have that in our Constitution expressly. And then you get Kavanaugh saying that somehow he concurs that could be changed by statute, which makes no sense.
Yeah, let's talk about that case. The birthright citizenship case, which came out on the final day of the court term on June 30th. And it's styled Trump versus Barbara. And Barbara was a woman from Honduras who was pregnant and was going to have her child born in the United States after the effective date of the executive order that the president entered. So while the headlines that I've seen in the Tampa Bay Times said, quote, Supreme Court upholds birthright citizenship, rejecting Trump's executive order. But really, this opinion's nothing to celebrate. And I say that not because of the correct narrow outcome, but for what the decision says about the justices who sit on this court. By way of background, Trump issued the executive order at the center of the case minutes after he was inaugurated. And it provided that babies who are born in the United States to parents who are in this country either illegally or temporarily are not automatically entitled to citizenship. Although Trump's order was slated to go into effect 30 days after he signed it, it never did. In fact, several federal judges across the U.S. prohibited the Trump administration from ever trying to enforce this order because it was blatantly unconstitutional on its face. In fact, there was one of the lower court judges that had been appointed by Ronald Reagan who said, I can't believe that this is even been filed, created. Where were the lawyers? Aren't there any lawyers in the White House that would know not to even put this on paper? But faced with the prospect that Trump's order could hold on indefinitely, the Trump administration, that is, came to the Supreme Court last spring, asking the justices to weigh in on, remember, it was here once before for universal injunctions where the administration would go to a particular judge that they knew was favorable. There's one in Texas, in one district in Texas, right, where you're guaranteed to get the result you want from this particular judge. And they would file things there, and then they would say that this,
applies nationwide.
This applies nationwide, and the court took this case up the first time a year ago, and by 6-3 overturned the universal injunctions. So it really depends on who's in power. When Biden was there, they would say no, you can't have a universal injunction, and when Trump's there, you can say you can, or vice versa. It just depends on what the case is that comes before these guys.
We mentioned last week that the Supreme Court has a current favorable rating of 18%, which is down there with us attorneys and used car salesmen. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's no more credibility with this court because you generally can predict what's going to happen. When in this case, and we could spend, we have 2 hours, we could spend we spend all day on these cases, but this case, again, there are about 255,000 children born. And what would you have done with those children, by the way? What would happen to them if you had said that they're not they have no rights of citizenship here? And they manufacture. Trump loves to manufacture these false narratives. One being we've talked about many times, these violent immigrants who are raping and killing, just a completely false narrative. But also here, this false narrative is, well, these pregnant women are going to just be coming into this country by the thousands and millions and giving birth, and oh my God, what a horrible thing that would be. And that was, they had a term for it. Was it something tourism? I forget. But the point is that if again, such an obvious case drew these dissents, including from Thomas, a 90-page dissent. Gorsuch kind of gets the free pass. Gorsuch is as bad as, frankly, Alito and Thomas, in my view, although he's not as corrupt, I think, perhaps. Maybe that's why he gets a free pass. But there's no question that the executive order that was entered into was unconstitutional the minute it was signed, and as you said, the first day in office. And the fact that it wasn't a 9-0 is just repulsive.
Yeah, for our listeners, the issue in the case was whether Trump's executive order declaring that some people who were born in this country whose parents were immigrants, like, well, Marco Rubio, for example, are not automatically citizens of the United States. And what they were, it's so clear from the 14th Amendment, which says this: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And in effect, it shows that we only have 5 members of the Supreme Court who can read that clear language of the 14th Amendment and say that Trump's executive order should have been upheld, and that the Constitution does not guarantee that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens with full rights of citizenship. Full stop.
Well, the court talked about this, again, precedent, which is important. And I know that sounds somewhat legalistic, perhaps to the non-attorneys who are listening or watching us on YouTube, but from 1898, the Swan Kim case made clear that any U.S.-born child of, in that case, Chinese nationals was a U.S. citizen. There's no question about this. And again, Gary, we're a nation of immigrants. All of a sudden now, it's all been turned on its head, and there's a sense if we're going to make it difficult, just like they're saying you can't pursue asylum unless you're in this country, but they're making it hard for you to get into this country. So it's a heads we win, tails you lose situation. It conveys this message around the world of meanness, cruelty, lack of conviction to our Constitution, which it's ironic we're celebrating the 250 years when we have this. I was mentioning earlier for the show to you, I remember 1976. I was 17 years old, and now I'm 67 years old. I remember the celebration in 1976. It's gotten worse. It's gotten worse. We're seeing things today that are much worse than even I think in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, just 3 or 4 years ago, this was just a theory of the most right-wing people, the crackpots, if you will, saying that if you're born here, you're not a citizen. And now you have 4 members of the U.S. Supreme Court who are willing to go along with that. It's just incredible. And Brett Kavanaugh, he actually said in his concurring opinion, he said, I agree that birthright citizenship should be upheld, but he didn't point to the 14th Amendment as his basis for it. He pointed to a statute that the Congress had passed back in the 50s. And he said, if Congress would go back in and amend this, then I might vote the other way. Well, that begs the question of why Justice Kavanaugh thinks that the plain meaning of the Constitution doesn't apply. And secondly, why he thinks a statute from Congress can override the Constitution. It just can't.
It's absurd that that would be the case given what we've talked about is under the 14th Amendment. And again, keep in mind, this was it wasn't even the Congress executing or signing off on a statute. The president comes in with his executive order, which is unilateral, illegal. And I've said many times that when the Democrat gets back into the Oval Office, all these ones that haven't been already invalidated by courts, which many have, will be just change, because you can't, executive orders mean nothing other than they can be changed when the Democrat gets in the Oval Office. But it is frightening. I would say, though, we've got to take our victories where we can. And given this court doesn't seem to want to follow precedent, it's frightening that we got that close to a train wreck. And then the length of these dissents, Thomas going on and on, 90 pages of a dissent, when it's obvious under the 14th Amendment what this and what cases have interpreted. And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it is important. Terms like stare decisis, precedent, and all these nominees come before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they raise their right hand and they swear under oath under God that they will follow precedent. And that's exactly the opposite of what's been happening with this court the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
they're completely overturning, precedents left and right, and it's it's so clear that they're legislating from the bench, something that Republicans used to complain about and used to accuse liberals of doing. But this court is, in my opinion, legislating from the bench on steroids, quote unquote, like we've never seen before. Something that Donald Trump would say.
There's something you've talked about, and I know we literally could spend 5 or 6 hours on all these cases. But you've mentioned many times, Gary, the shadow docket, which is a separate issue, but it's been another way to skirt how the court operates and the stays they've entered, no hearings, no briefing. So the shadow docket issue is something that we need to also be very concerned about.
Well, let's climb off the ledge for a minute and talk about another case that had a good result for democracy, the Mississippi voting case involving mail-in ballots. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened, what the court did in Watson versus Republican National Committee?
Well, that's another case, by the way. Just over 4 months before the 2026 midterm elections, the Supreme Court on Monday upheld a Mississippi law that allows mail-in ballots to be counted as long as they're postmarked by and received within 5 days of election. That, again, should have been obvious. That was a vote of 5-4 that the court rejected an argument made by the political parties and others that federal law requires mail-in ballots to be received by election day. And writing for the majority, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who has from time to time been helpful, concluded that the election day statutes requires the electorate's choice to be made on election day. That occurs so long as election day is the deadline for individuals to vote, as it is in Mississippi. But the election day statutes do not set a deadline for ballot receipts, so as they do not prevent Mississippi from counting ballots postmarked before election day yet received afterward. There's a lot I could say here, but let me make a few comments about this case. Number one, I was listening to Mark Elias, who's the primary, Democratic lawyer, and this was one of his cases, and it was a big win for him.
He's a big election lawyer,
huge, and he's fighting he's got some podcasts here, but one of the points I want to make here is that it is a state by state analysis, but that should be done. This was the state of Mississippi, but to suggest that that a postmarked that doesn't come in on time can't be counted just doesn't make any sense. And there's another point I want to make here, Gary, is that this seems to affect the poor and parts of the country where maybe the mailing process is less efficient. And there's
military ballots,
right? But there's
people serving overseas.
But the Republican Party would not be pushing this if they did not believe that this helps the Democrats in terms of they must believe the majority of the people affected by this that they want to keep out, which again, voter suppression is the theme here. But that was a victory too. These are hard-earned victories. There's going to be, Elias was saying there's going to be a case they've already taken for next year out of Arizona on this as well. Now, so it's something that and only 19 states allow this. So it's not like every state allows for this, and more should, but again, it's a state-by-state analysis. But again, I think we need to take our wins where we can. Again, this was a 5-4. This should have also been a 9-0.
Well, I've listened to Nicole Wallace, a lot, who was a former Republican and worked in the Bush White House and was on the campaign for John McCain. And she said, for years, Republicans were the ones that voted by mail more than Democrats.
That's exactly
right.
And
he said, this is hurting them as well. People like this. They like the convenience of being able to vote whenever they want to and not have to vote on a particular day. You might be in the hospital on election day, but if you could get your ballot posted ahead of time before you went in for surgery and because the post office doesn't get it delivered in time, your vote should still be counted. Come on.
Well, Trump's done it at least twice. He must like mail-in voting. You're exactly right, Gary. This was something that primarily Republicans, which that was a Republican Party. This is not a Republican Party anymore under Trump. This is a cult. But now that they perceive that this is hurting them, and there's this perception that all this mail-in voting is somehow creating fraud, is again a false narrative. So
again, this should have been a 9-0 decision, but it
exactly
wasn't.
Right.
Because again, you have Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh believe that your vote shouldn't be counted, even if it was timely postmarked. You say you walked it into the post office and had it stamped to make sure that it was going to be on time.
Well, then there is an objective standard. It has to be postmarked.
Yeah.
So a voter can't control how long it takes to get there, and usually it's 10 days. So it's a state by state analysis. This was, Trump is big on wanting to federalize these elections, which is improper. But it's a victory. When you got a battle to say that the sky is blue, which is what happens. It's a constant battle. And Elias, who again, I would urge our listeners and viewers to go to the internet. He speaks on there quite a bit, but he was told this was a waste of time. There's no way he could win this case. The Republicans put a ton of money into this, a ton of money. This became, and they went to Mississippi, by the way. Let me make some other points. They thought that was a soft state because the Attorney General of Mississippi wasn't going to push back hard against this issue. Yep. They went to a deep red state, and basically the Republican Party came in and said, "We'll take this over. We'll argue this." And then what Elias did was he intervened on behalf of two senior veterans groups that were affected by this because of the points that you mentioned earlier about older people having difficulty getting to the polls. So, but that was necessary. If Elias hadn't come in on behalf of those two separate entities, I think they would have probably lost this case.
Yeah, and Elias also said that he felt like this case was filed there as a test case, saying that if they prevail on this mail-in ballot issue, then they can go, the Republican Party, that is, go and attack early voting, because they don't want that either. They don't want people to vote any day except on election day. And, it shouldn't everybody be able to vote, and shouldn't you make it easier to vote than not vote? But apparently that's not what they want.
Well, it's part of their playbook of voter suppression. We want to limit this. And it is contrary to, as we both mentioned earlier, what the general Republicans have liked this, because they tend to be wealthier. And as you mentioned, are traveling, or if they're older, are sick, there used to be fairly difficult, high standards for absentee voting. But there's, again, a false narrative is that all this making easier voting, Gary, has caused fraud. That's just a false narrative. Yeah. There's no evidence of that. And you hear these congressional hearings, and these witnesses who are just clones of Trump and told what to say. When they're asked, can you give us some evidence of fraud? They can't do it. They start making a speech. They don't even answer the question. So these are hard-earned victories. One was a 6-3. This was a 5-4, which we both agree should have been both 9-0 obvious victories. But we got to take the victories where we can.
Well, one of the cases that was decided this week, Trump versus Slaughter, has basically given unlimited power to the president to fire anyone in the executive branch. This decision overturned more than 90 years of judicial precedent and will fundamentally make our president closer to a king than at any time in our nation's 250-year history. It's John Roberts' decision in Trump versus Slaughter that completes the Chief Justice's lifelong dream of instituting the unitary executive theory that Roberts has espoused since he was a lowly Justice Department lawyer working in the Reagan administration. Kevin, tell us a little bit about that case.
I will, but I want to start out by saying, do these Republicans, where again, their whole theme is with Trump has been executive power, they think that we as Democrats, when we get back to the White House, we're not going to do the same thing? This is not a one-way street. So to the extent that Trump thinks that the executive branch should have all this power and the two other branches, judicial and the legislature, has given them that power, and these opinions by the Supreme Court has clearly shown that they're moving to the executive branch. It's just a two-way street. So I don't want to hear one MAGA Republican whining when we come in as a Democratic president in 2 years and just take over. But back on the case, Federal Trade Commission was created by Congress more than a century ago. It has 5 commissioners, no more than 3 of whom may come from any one political party. Each commissioner is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate to serve a 7-year term. During his first term in office, Trump nominated Rebecca Slaughter to fill one of the Democratic seats on the FTC. Then President Joe Biden renominated her in 2023 to serve a second term. And last year, the White House notified Slaughter in a letter that she had been removed from the Federal Trade Commission effective immediately. The letter did not cite any of the legal grounds that would allow Trump to fire her. Instead, Trump told Slaughter that allowing her to remain on the FTC would be inconsistent with my administration's priorities. She went to federal court in D.C. to challenge her firing, and the federal judge there, a lower court, ordered the Trump administration to reinstate her, in a divided panel of the D.C. Court of Appeals, which, as you know, is 3 judges, rejected the government's request to pause that ruling while it appealed. Court wrote that only the Supreme Court could overturn the decision in Humphrey's executor, which in their view was controlling in Slaughter's case. Again, you talk about precedent. The Trump administration then went to the Supreme Court asking the court to freeze this order while litigation continued. Over dissent by Kagan, joined by Sotomayor and Jackson, the court granted the government's application, effectively permitting Trump to fire Slaughter and set the case for oral argument in December. So let me, again, we get in the weeds here a little bit. These are what's happening, and there's another case where the one exception has been with the Federal Reserve, and is it Rice, Lisa Cook, who's going to be up.
And John Roberts wrote both opinions, and they're completely opposite. In one hand, these both deal with agencies that Congress established that said, you know what, we want these to be independent. The FTC is a consumer-based organization, agency that's supposed to protect consumer rights from, corporations and banks and others that are trying to take advantage of folks. And so they felt like they should be independent from any kind of control and only be removed for cause, misfeasance in office, something like that. But here they're saying, no, he can do whatever he wants to do. These are all parts of the executive branch, and under this unitary executive theory, the president has to have control over these people, or else we have nothing. Well, Congress has said, you know what? There's certain things that we want to have independent. And the court just ran roughshod over that. And this Humphrey's executor case that was the precedent has been around for 91 years. And everybody has followed it. Every Supreme Court has followed it until this one. And now they said, no, we're gonna wipe this off the books. And we're going to let the president, this particular president, and have that power. And that is one of the primary things that was in Project 2025. They say, if the president can't control everything in the executive branch, then it's a problem. Well, the founders and Congress, we had this 3-legged stool that we have often talked about on this show. That stool no longer has 3 equal.
Well, again, what goes
legs.
around comes around, Gary. I don't want to hear one peep or whine from these Republicans when the Democrat is in the White House controlling these agencies. And there's a theme here. And the theme is something you noted a minute ago, is these are pro-consumer, primarily type of entities, and protecting consumers. And the one area where they made the distinction was with the Federal Reserve, which primarily is more pro the business pro corporation. That was a victory for Cook, and I think the right decision. I think you made the point earlier that Roberts wrote both decisions, and the distinctions he made, I think, were somewhat dubious. But that is a number 2 points. One, it is against clear precedent, which is something that conservatives generally don't like. I mean, you want to have some sense of predictability as to what a court is going to do. And so what you have here is this court completely, as you said, as Congress has done, just concede power to the president. But when Gavin Newsom is president, I don't want to hear one whine from you Republicans. You made this bed, and it is going to be a two-edged sword. And we Democrats probably want to be more fair about this. The hell with that. If you want to make this a strong executive, then you better accept the consequences, unless you assume that there's never going to be another Democrat in the White House. But it was a bad decision, bad reasoning, overcoming precedent. In terms of, I'm working with the law school at the University of Florida this summer. None of this, when you step back and you were teaching this class in 2 years, when you can digest this, makes any sense, Gary.
All right. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more of the topics that conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com, and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
And I'll tell you, tonight it's nice. We got a grown-up crowd, too, Yeah, I did a show last week for a bunch of teenagers. And these kids carry on today. You can't tell boys from girls. I mean, the girls that wear slacks, fellas let their hair grow. I was talking to somebody, I said, look at that teenager. What's that, a boy or a girl? He said, that's a boy. That's my son. I said, sure, you knew you're his father. He said, I'm not his father. I'm his mother. I don't know. I tell you, life isn't easy. After a while, I don't know who to believe anymore. Well, the other day I was in my bank. They got signs all over there. At this bank of a friend. Last month I was 2 payments behind. My friend took away my car. I tell you, with me, nothing comes easy. Nothing, Well, last week I saw my dentist. Not a beauty, my dentist. I said to him, can you put in a new tooth to match my other teeth? He put in a tooth with 4 cavities. I'll tell you, last week was a rough week for me, last week. I broke up my psychiatrist, too, last week. For the first time, I told him I got suicidal tendencies. He told me from now on I have to pay in advance.
Gary, I thought, that's Rodney Dangerfield, I think, one of the funniest comedians we ever had. Since we're all on the ledge here, I think we need to just have a little bit of light humor.
Yeah, we try to do a little bit of comedy because it's really it's depressing to hear about a lot of things that are happening day to day. We're going to go now to Poll Watch. Yeah. Poll Watch, approximately 90% of Republicans believe that Donald Trump is not corrupt, according to a recent YouGov poll, indicating that only 10% of Republicans describe him as corrupt. Voter perspectives break down along partisan lines as this. Republicans overwhelmingly view him as not corrupt, with large swaths viewing him as a strong and qualified leader. Democrats, conversely, and overwhelmingly 93% of Democrats view him as corrupt. Overall, the electorate, when looking at the broader American population, general polling shows that around 54% of all voters believe he brings corruption to Washington, the grift that keeps on giving.
Senator Chris Murphy gave a 30-minute speech on the Senate floor a few weeks ago. He called it 500 Days of Corruption. And I would refer that our listeners and viewers to YouTube to see that. Just Google Chris Murphy recent speech on 500 Days of Corruption, and just went through again and again the various levels of corruption. It is, to me, somewhat fascinating the lens of that is so different based upon your party affiliation. But as Senator Murphy noted, these are objectively, he wasn't arguing out of opinion. He was just citing the facts. For example, this crypto world, this president earned almost $2 billion in his first year.
More than $2 billion.
Yeah. And most of that was in this crypto world.
Which is totally unregulated.
Yeah, it's unregulated. Blanche, by the way, our good friend Todd Blanche, who's going to be, I can't wait for the Senate Judiciary Committee probably in August next month. Both own major investments in crypto. They eliminated any type of regulation of crypto. They took that out of the Department of Justice. There's a company called Pilgrim Pride, a poultry company. They made a $5 million donation to Trump, and the administration, and what I would call pay for play. And this is one of the points that Senator Murphy made. There were many, many points, but it had to do with, this is very detailed, but revised that there were salmonella regulations that applied. And this was a poultry company saying, we don't want these regulations. Paid $5 million to Trump to have access to him. It's like the king, just like these corrupt pardons we'll talk about in a second. But those regulations went away. These salmonella regulations, which again protect the consumer. It's very consistent, again, with what we talked about earlier, which saying the president can control who's going to be on these various agencies like the Federal Trade Commission and whatnot. And it's all anti-consumer. And so if you pay $5 million as Pilgrim Pride, the company did, you get what you want. It's all about money.
Yeah. And I want to talk about really what we've done with some of these decisions that have happened in the last week. That slaughter case that we talked about right before the break is a huge decision that grants unlimited power to the president, something our founding fathers detested, and says that Congress, you can't create positions in our government that are free from political interference. We created the civil service in our country after seeing the problems with patronage system, which the winner of the election stacked the government with his political allies and cronies. And we also tried to create expertise within those government offices so that people would act more independently without political interference every 4 or 8 years. And this makes me wonder, if the president could now simply fire the entire federal workforce without cause. Well, there's one notable exception, and there's another case that, again, was written by John Roberts, and it makes me wonder whether he remembered the first case that he wrote, the slaughter case, when he then writes the Lisa Cook case. Because since taking office in January 2025, Trump's attempted to assert control over several multi-member independent agencies whose officials could also be removed for cause. And those include the Federal Trade Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, the Merit Systems Protection Board, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And but somehow Cook was different because she works for the Fed. And Trump posted a screenshot of a social media of the letter they sent to Cook, which he just said, "You're fired." He accused her of all sorts of problems with a mortgage application that she made. And but John Roberts, writing for the majority in this case, concluded that if the Trump administration was correct, it would, in effect, transform the Federal Reserve's for cause protection into an at-will employment, an interpretive leap out of step with the statute that Congress enacted and our nation's tradition of central banking protected from political interference. Again, why is Justice Roberts applying a different standard for all of the other agencies that Congress wanted to be independent?
Well, I agree with you. I think one of the things that we look for in the court system is consistency, and there's accountability for these federal judges we've talked about or have lifetime appointments, and somewhat of the accountability is an expectation, Gary, of consistency and complying with precedent, and also interpreting statutes in a manner that is consistent. that was the first time that the Federal Reserve's 111-year history that had happened, where there'd been an attempt to remove. But I agree with you. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. The difference, Alito filed a dissent. Can I just interject for 1 second, personal note? I mentioned this once, when I was a circuit judge, there was something called the Red Mass, where the Catholic lawyers and the judges, and I remember Alito had just gotten appointed, and I was at Christ the King Catholic Church in Tampa, and Alito happened to be sitting in front of me, just a few feet away, he and his wife. And I remember, and this was back, I guess, under Bush, because it was in the, probably 2007, 2006, whenever Alito was appointed. I never really thought at the time, though, that the amount of destruction he would cause on the rule of law and what he's done. I don't know how much longer he's going to be on the bench. There's talk that he and Thomas may retire before Trump leaves office, so they can appoint young 40-year-old MAGA people. But he filed a dissent, joined by Gorsuch, Coney Barrett had a dissenting opinion. But this, the Federal Reserve, it's a 14-member body. No one reserve member has even the chair doesn't control the votes. It's, as you mentioned, it's an independent government agency that is not funded by Congress through the normal appropriations process. So I think that was the right decision, but I think we both agree it should have applied across the board to these other commissions as well.
Yeah. There was no distinction other than money. The financial system, apparently that was a bridge too far. Forget consumer rights and protections and all of those other things that the other agencies that I mentioned are charged with the task of enforcing.
Well, I heard Kevin Warsh, who's the new Fed chair. I don't think much is going to happen now. There will not be a drop in interest rates given the concern about inflation. And the job, by the way, the job numbers are very, very poor for the last 2 months. They just came out much below expectations. So the economy is not doing well. I love how Trump just brags about the stock market, which doesn't affect the vast majority of the people in this country.
Yeah. Another case that the court issued this week was on the temporary protected status. And that involves the congressionally approved temporary protected status of immigrants. The Supreme Court gave the Trump administration the green light to begin mass deportations of people who've been living and working legally in the United States for years, some even for decades. But by a predictable 6-3 vote along ideological lines, the court's conservative majority ruled that the president has virtually unrestrained power to end the temporary protected status program known as TPS. Congress enacted TPS in 1990 to allow fully vetted and eligible migrants to live and work legally in the U.S. if they cannot return safely to their home countries because of natural disasters, armed conflicts, or other extraordinary conditions. The Department of Homeland Security designates which foreign countries qualify for temporary protected status. Since the law's enactment, every president, Republican and Democrat, has embraced it except Trump. He, in contrast, is trying to end the temporary protected status of hundreds of thousands of immigrants, and on Thursday, the High Court gave him the tools to do it. Writing for the court's conservatives, Justice Sam Alito said that the TPS statute bars any court review of how the president and his Department of Homeland Security have used their authority to end TPS status. At the same time, he also rejected the Haitians' separate constitutional claim that the decision to eject them from the country was based on racial prejudice. Political discourse by prominent public figures is increasingly couched in terms that would have scandalized the public just a short time ago, Alito said. But whatever one may think of those statements, they are insufficient to show that the termination of Haiti's TPS designations was based on the race of the Haitian people. we all heard him say they're eating the cats and dogs. They're, all of those racial statements and the dissents. Actually, Elena Kagan listed all of the things that had come out of Trump's mouth that were racist. And then the court says, oh, none of these decisions are based on race. This decision affects 350,000 Haitians, and a third of those Haitians work in our healthcare sector. They're caregivers, they're doctors. And think of the part of the bipartisan support that was the recognition of local impact that it would have on Americans who are obviously desperately seeking care for themselves, their kids, and their parents. That bipartisan support was recently demonstrated when the House of Representatives passed an extended TPS status for Haitians. But even if it were to pass the Senate, Trump would certainly veto that bill. There are more than a dozen countries that have been designated with temporary protected status, including the two in this case, Haiti with 350,000 displaced persons living in the U.S. legally, and Syria with roughly 3,800. The U.S. State Department currently warns Americans in the strongest terms not to go to these countries because of the dangers of crime, terrorism, kidnapping, unrest, and limited health care. But the court's decision means that the president can end temporary status of Haitians and Syrians and send them back to the hellhole. So, it's these are people that have been living here legally, for that period of time. And now the court says, nope, sorry, get the hell out.
Well, again, the theme is one of cruelty and meanness. It's affecting, it's like these migrant workers, they're Republicans who rely upon these workers. This isn't some liberal, cause, and it's affecting a lot of people that probably voted Republican. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of these Senate races. I just think it's very important that we win these elections and push back, both not in the House and the Senate. And I want to talk a little bit after the break about some of these Senate races. But it's embarrassment. It's a dark period. It's clearly racist, and it's not legal, by the way. And by the way, they were on a personal level. They improperly deported quite a few people to Venezuela last week, and several of them were killed in that earthquake. They should never have been relocated back to Venezuela. But we could spend hours talking about the problems with this policy as to immigrants and temporary workers in this country. But as James Carville says, we've got to win both elections in the House and the Senate to take control and take back some of this, because this is clearly improper. It doesn't. And by the way, there are many polls, by the way, other countries that have very, very little respect right now for the United States. We've talked about last week, Gary, how we try and be the beacon on the hill, and that's not the case at all anymore.
Yeah, and to be clear, these people were not the so-called worst of the worst, the criminals, the ones that everybody thinks should be removed and deported from the country. These are people that have been working here and assimilated into the United States. This is where they live now, and many of them are working in our economy for decades. So,
paying
shameful.
taxes, and they pay. They're paying sales tax. A lot of these people are paying. We talked about this. You've talked about this earlier about other shows about they pay into the FICA Social Security system without getting the benefits from it. On a very personal level, it affects people. As you said, it affects the person who's giving care to the elderly. Again, this comes out of the Project 2025, Stephen Miller, the vote, the people we've talked about. But again, we need to change this. We've got to stop this wave of cruelty and racism, which has gone on the last, not just 2 years, for the 4 years prior. We've had this nightmare of Trump now has been 10 years from 2016 that we've had to live through. Never had such a corrupt administration in the history of this country.
And one more case I want to talk about before we go to break, and that's campaign finance laws. Just when you thought there was already too much money in politics, the Supreme Court gave another gift to the Republican Party, overturning campaign finance laws that were put in place after Watergate. The Supreme Court on Tuesday, in a major ruling on money in elections, decided 6-3 again, surprise, surprise. They struck down a federal law that limited the amount of money that political parties can spend in coordination with a candidate for office. The majority opinion, written by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, agreed with the challengers that the coordinated expenditure limits violate the First Amendment. This is the old money is free speech, and you got to be able to spend it.
Well, once again, they overturned the prior precedents.
Yeah.
In the case of Federal Election Commission versus Colorado Republican Federal Campaign Committee, which the court by 5-4 upheld the same limits.
Right.
When we talked about
the only difference is the makeup of this court. It's these people have decided, nope, I don't want to do that anymore. So they're legislating from the bench by overturning precedent. As lawyers, we rely on precedent to advise our clients on what the state of the law is. And if you give somebody advice and then the next day 5 people say it's something different, or 6 people say it's something different, there are ramifications for that.
Well, once again, there's a thing. We talked about this just last week with the redistricting, how the court upheld a district in the South, was it Mississippi or Alabama, that they had invalidated 3 years ago. So just like this, they same set of facts, they just came back with a different ruling based upon, I think, a different composition from the court. So when you can't rely upon the court, you should be surprised when you see an 18% approval respect in this country for the Supreme Court. And you mentioned the 6-3, you can pretty much predict in most of these cases, when you say 6-3, you don't have any doubt who the 6 are and who the 3 are.
Yeah.
So just, you reap what you sow here. So if you have this with this administration, Gary, this sense of it's all about the unitary executive power, just do not complain and whine to me in 2 years when the Democrats take over and say enough. Then we're gonna give you a view of the world that you don't like, because what goes around comes around.
Yeah, I was listening to a little bit of the news on the way over here, and there's some concern about U.S. markets perhaps being in a bubble. The president is bragging about how well the stock market's doing and how his 401k. How's your 401k? And like most of the reporters he was talking to said, I don't have one.
Yeah, I think 3 people out of the crowd raised their hand. Now, we don't have a ton of time to talk, but there was a very bad gun control law out of Hawaii was invalidated. And I love these conservatives. States' rights, the federal government is one of limited authority and the powers given the states, and they're invalidating these state statutes. And pretty soon, I guess you could have an AK-47 anywhere you want to have one, including on private property.
Well, there's a lot of concern about the U.S. markets perhaps being in a bubble, because they're up about 30% for the last 15 months ending in May. And perhaps they are, but it pales in comparison to others around the world when you look at ETFs, which are an investment fund that holds a mix of assets and trades on an exchange like a stock, giving investors diversification and flexibility in a single purchase. There are certain countries, to be fair, foreign markets have been downtrodden for almost 15 years going into 2025. However, the rise in the U.S. market placed the United States in just 35th position from January 1st, 2025 to May of 2026. Heck, even France is ahead of the U.S. At the top of the list is South Korea, up a whopping 314%. Followed by Peru, up almost 120%, Taiwan up about 107%, and Poland up close to 105%. So we'll see. Everybody, there's 7 top stocks in that are all tech stocks that have been driving the stock market. And there's a lot of concern that there may be a bubble coming.
We could spend hours on this. I want to focus again on this just a minute about this, this corruption in this administration that Senator Chris Murphy talked about very eloquently last week on the Senate floor. October of last year, this ballroom corruption, just as an example, I can just hit the tip of the iceberg. Half of the donors to that project, half of them received $50 billion in contract, either new or expanded contracts from the government. $50 billion. Just think about that, those numbers.
Yeah.
They're staggering.
Staggering. Well, we're going to go to a break now, and we'll be back after the break with more of the news that Republicans never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
Less hiring and less unemployment. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. We got that update to the economy this morning.
There were just 57,000 new jobs created in June, fewer than expected, though the unemployment rate declined to 4.2%. Economists were predicting job growth of 110,000 and the unemployment rate holding at 4.3%.
That's Fox's Janika Sola. More than a week after twin earthquakes devastated Venezuela, a survivor pulled from the rubble. As crews keep searching for thousands still missing, more than 2,200 confirmed dead. A search also continues in the Arabian Sea for a missing U.S. Navy sailor after a helicopter made an emergency water landing. 3 others on board were rescued. U.S. Central Command says there's no indication enemy fire was the cause. This after mediators in Qatar reported progress after 2 more days of indirect U.S. and Iran talks. Fox's Trey Yingst reports from Tel Aviv.
As the Middle East waits to see what comes next in the ceasefire with Iran, Israel is marking 1,000 days since the October 7th massacre. A rally was held outside of the Knesset today, Israel's parliament, to call for accountability in the aftermath of the attack.
We demand an official commission of inquiry by the Israeli government to investigate.
That Hamas terror attack killed more than 1,000 Israelis and triggered the deadly destructive war in Gaza. At least 20 people are dead in Kyiv after what Ukraine's foreign minister called a night of horror. Russia attacked with hundreds of drones and missiles.
Loud explosions shook the Ukrainian capital for hours. The attack, with ballistic and cruise missiles and drones, damaged buildings and civilian infrastructure across the city.
Fox's Greg Palcott. At the World Cup, the U.S. advanced to the round of 16.
I felt we put on such a good performance and didn't deserve the red card. I mean, I didn't see it, but it's unfortunate.
That's Christian Pulisic. The U.S. beat Bosnia and Herzegovina 2-0, despite being shorthanded most of the second half after the red card foul took a player out of the game. America's listening to Fox News.
I move mountains for a living. Literally. That means I don't carry hand lotion, and when it comes to serious heartburn, I don't mess around with anything but Rolaids Max Strength. Its dual-active formula has 1,500 milligrams of calcium carbonate and magnesium hydroxide that relieves heartburn fast. And the best part? The roll fits right here in my pocket, so I can get back to moving mountains.
Rolaids spells powerful relief. 1,500 milligrams is our highest amount of antacid per tablet. Read each label. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
The Fox News Podcasts Network.
Hey, this is Trey Gowdy, host of the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Every Tuesday, you'll hear what's on my mind. Plus, every Thursday, there's a special bonus episode where we answer the questions that are on your mind. Make sure to spend your Tuesdays and Thursdays with Trey. Subscribe now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Hope to see you.
America's listening to Fox News.
This is Downtown Dave. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the Tam Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the the Tan Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, free production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Gary Gibbons.
Well, welcome back to the Voice of Reason. With me in the Tan Talk studio is my co-host, attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey. And joining us by telephone is Owen Robertson, the director of a new play that's opening tonight, The Cross and the Saber. It's going to be debuting today at the Lab Theater in Ybor City over in Tampa. And it's about the dangers of the growing Christian evangelical influence on American government and the prospect of the loss of our First Amendment freedoms. Production opens today and runs through July 19th. And I don't know if we have also on the line the playwright who wrote this, who's a renowned writer, Wendy Graff. So welcome, Owen and Wendy. Tell us a little bit about this play that's going to open in Tampa tonight.
Thanks for having us, guys. The show tonight opens, like you said, it's covering a lot of the continuing spread of Christian nationalism within our government and everything. It's set as a not too distant future. It also adds a layer of it that we also, the play delves into the prospect of AI being introduced and influencing the judicial system. So we actually have two characters who are AI lawyers, and then we have an AI investigator. And I mean, the premise of the show begins with the opening of a pastor who's been arrested for preaching out against Christian nationalism and in politics being forced upon him in his church. And he's arrested for counts of treason for that. It's considered a treasonous act in this world.
I'm
So
here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Wendy, we can hear you. Tell us why you decided to write this play.
I wrote the play almost 20 years ago. The play has a very interesting history. I wrote it in 2003 when the Bush presidency was veering towards Christian evangelism and nationalism. And then I read this article in the paper about a pastor in Minneapolis who quit his church and started a new congregation because he objected to the growing Christian nationalism. and theocracy that was being inserted into the church. And I interviewed him, and because I'm a writer who says, so what could possibly happen, in my imagination, I put the whole thing together, and it was supposed to be in the future, a near future. And every time I rewrote the play, I had to keep bumping up the future because the future was now. And so with the rise of the second Trump administration, AI, Christian nationalism, racism, immigrants, authoritarianism has exploded. So I opted again and updated to the version that's being produced tonight. And it's still an urgent story to tell based on what's going on in the country right now, as it was when the seeds were planted for this play and the country in 2003. So there you go.
It's wild that it was written 20 years ago, and yet history. What do they say? It doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes.
Yeah.
Owen, tell us a little bit. How big is this theater, and are there tickets available for people that want to go?
So we're a small theater with we seat 24. It's a very intimate setting. You as an audience member, there's nowhere to hide. You're right there with the actors. You get fully immersed with them, and there are tickets available. We run for 3 weekends, but we also have a unique feature that we offer. The show extends for 2 weeks beyond the in-person with an on-demand as well.
How does that work?
So we tape the show. We do sometimes 3 or 4 tapings, and then we edit and create a video of the show. And it's just like an on-demand program you would offer through a streaming service. You go onto our website, you purchase the ticket for it. And when you activate your ticket, you have a 24-hour window to watch the show.
Oh, that's interesting. That's great, because a lot of times people can't get to a production during the time that it's running, and they really wanted to see it. So,
right,
that's fantastic. How could you find tickets for this if you wanted to, if our listeners want to go?
Sure. If the listeners want to go, the best way is to go to our website, www.labtheaterproject.org, and we spell theater with an ER. So it's labtheaterproject.org. And you just go onto the main page, and the button for clicking on tickets is right there at the top. Can't miss it.
And the Lab Theater is located at 812 East Henderson Avenue in Ybor City, so Tampa.
We're on the west end of Ybor. The cross street for us is Henderson Avenue in Nebraska.
Okay. Wonderful. Anything else that you'd like to tell us about the production?
I think this production is really, really important in our time and everything like that. We chose this production to launch at this time of year because we knew we were coming up on our, with the 250th celebration of our country and everything. And I'm a vet. I'm very proud of our country and everything. I'm proud of my service, but I also recognize that the role theater has is sometimes to hold a mirror up that's uncomfortable for society to see. And I feel like right now with what's going on in our country, we can celebrate, but we need to hold the mirror up, and it needs to be, we can't look away. We need to look at it. And so we chose to put the cross and saber up so that we were holding this mirror up for everybody and saying, here it is, this is where we are. And even though Wendy wrote this 20 years ago, and, we originally, when we picked this play, I thought our future was a little further away. And then every time we open up the newspaper or read a news article, it seems like our future is less and less distant and more right on top of us.
I think that the main thrust of the play is for the audience to answer the question after the play is over, what would you do? I don't write answers. I just write questions. And I have no agenda for what I want the audience to take away, except for to see the truth of human behavior and to answer the question, what would you do?
Well, I think that's the kind of performances that I like to go to, because I think, when you go to the theater, you should really, it should be thought provoking and really make you think about, what should be done. So that's wonderful. And I would urge our listeners to actually Google Wendy Graff. It's Graf. She has an amazing biography. And has done so much work writing for television and plays, and incredible talent there, Wendy. Thank you so much for your great work.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you will come and see the play, because it's been a very thrilling experience for me to finally see this play after 20 years and multiple workshops and this and that, to see it fully realized and in such a beautiful, thrilling, and challenging way.
Fantastic. And thank you all. Wendy, thank you for getting up bright and early on the West Coast to join us by phone.
And we do appreciate that.
And Owen, we look forward to going to see this play. It sounds fantastic. So and thought provoking.
We hope to see you guys there. I'd like, if it's okay, I'd just like one last thing about what Lab is and why we're unique. We're the only company in the Southeast that's dedicated to the production of new work.
That's wonderful.
So everything we do is a world premiere.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today on The Voice of Reason.
Great. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us.
Y'all have a great weekend.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The jumping back to some of the topics we've talked about, Gary, one of the things that Senator said about this issue with Trump, his quote in April was, "I will pardon everyone within 200 feet of the White House," which is what his literal words. It's important. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about these Senate races, because the only way to deal with this utter corruption is to have some pushback, and that's going to require Democrat control. Just a quick another example, though, that was Senator Chris Murphy mentioned, was big tobacco and the Food and Drug Administration. You mentioned earlier, Gary, correctly, about how these agencies like that they protect consumers. They should not be subject to just total executive control. But big tobacco went to the president, made a $5 million donation to Trump, and they said, we want to get into this flavored vape products, which and we want you to rescind a vape rule which had prevented big tobacco from getting into this vape, flavored vape, which is affecting quite a few minors. So they went to the Food and Drug Administration commissioner and said, we want you to rescind that rule so big tobacco could now become part of this market. The FDA commissioner resigned in protest over that, Gary. And there are a few people out there that still have some intestinal fortitude. So he resigned in protest. There was no rulemaking procedure followed, by the way. People may not understand, because of this chaos. There is a procedure to follow if you want to change rules, regulations, and the rule was changed. So again, pay per play, which is the theme. $5 million contribution by Big Tobacco got them into this, flavored vaping. So one of the quick example, he purchased. There's no blind trust with Trump. He made it a $1 million investment in Dell stock. Dell then got a $10 billion Pentagon contract. I don't know why this doesn't bother people. This is, and I'm not saying, I don't think that the Democrats should be getting rich either, but this is clearly a conflict of interest, that you're making all this money, and we could spend, hours just about that, and as well as, the children, et cetera. But I want to move on, if I might. I want to talk a little bit about these Senate races, because I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to understand what's happening, because if we don't get control of the Senate, we're not going to have the ability to really make change. If we get both houses, it will be, as I think as Senator Cornyn said from Texas, that this will be the worst 2 years of Trump's life, and would like nothing more to see some of this corruption end. But just specifically for a few minutes, you look at what states, it's currently a 53 to 47. So we need to pick up Democrats for a net 4, because of 50-50, the vice president would break a tie. And the point I want to make is that there are some states that have now into play. I want to just go through those states quickly. One is Nebraska. As independent candidate Dan Osborne, who's got a very good chance of winning there. Virginia, Mark Warner is running for re-election. I think will be fine. New Hampshire, I think, should also be in the blue category. Florida is a special election because, as we know, Ashley Moody, who was a colleague of mine on the bench in Tampa, was appointed as she had been elected Attorney General. So, because she was appointed when Rubio became Secretary of State, that election is now. So it's a special election with Vindman. I don't know if we can pull that off, but it is, I think, in play. Some of the ones that I would be optimistic about is Alaska. There's an incumbent named Dan Sullivan. Mary Peltola, who was a former congresswoman, which in Alaska, being a relatively small state population-wise, was a statewide election. And I think very much we have a chance of taking Alaska. Georgia, which is John Ossoff running against a guy named Mike Collins, who was just recently won the Republican primary a few weeks ago in Georgia. I think Ossoff is the betting markets now have him very much keeping that seat. North Carolina, Roy Cooper, who's the former governor, against a guy named Michael Whatley, who's Republican. I think very much that's probably the highest percentage of that. And again, we need a net 4. Minnesota, Tina Smith, who's a Democrat, retired. And again, I think that the chances are very good. I think that a Democrat could take that seat, although it's kind of interesting. Michelle Tafoya, who's a sports broadcaster with ESPN, is actually one of the Republicans running. Their primary is August 11th in Minnesota. Adam Schwartz, who's a retired Navy SEAL. The Democrats have Peggy Flanagan, who's lieutenant governor, and Angie Craig, who's in the U.S. House. But I think very good chance we can hold that. Ohio is critical. Sherrod Brown, we've talked about, who was previously a senator, is running against John Husted, who's the incumbent. But again, like Ashley Moody, Gary was never elected. He was appointed when our good friend, the vice president, went from being in the U.S. Senate to vice president. Maine, Susan Collins against Graham Plattner. I think that's a critical race. And then we have Texas, James Tellerico, the Democrat, against Ken Paxton, who had a very contentious race against the incumbent, as I mentioned, John Cornyn. So, and then you look at Iowa, Joni Ernst retired. And then the Democrat is Josh Turek, the Republican Ashley Hinson. Turek is up right now 4 points. So there's a very good chance we could take Iowa. Michigan, Gary Peters is a Democrat who's retiring. I know this is a lot of information. Mike Rogers is a Republican. There'll be a primary August 4th on that. Mallory McMorrow is, I think, the leading Democrat. She's a state senator. There's an Abdul El Sayad, who's a Democrat, and Haley Stevens, who's also representative. All three of those in polls lead Mike Rogers. So you've got to hold Michigan, you've got to hold Georgia, you've got to hold Minnesota, then you got to pick up 4. So you look at North Carolina, Alaska, Iowa, Maine, Nebraska, Iowa, perhaps Texas. I think Texas is going to be a challenge. I think Florida is going to be a challenge. But I think my point I want to make, and I think it's important for our viewers and listeners who care about that we need to respond to this corrupt administration, Gary, is to look at these races and if you can donate and help out even in other states, please do it, because this is a huge issue to get control of the Senate, which I don't think was perceived as possible 6 months ago because of, I think, what's happened with this administration and the war and the economy and Epstein. We haven't talked about Epstein. There was a major ruling last week on the Epstein case where a journalist is going to had standing. The court
Let's
held
go
had
ahead and talk
standing.
about that. That's Katie Fang.
Yes. Well,
Um,
Katie Fang is a lawyer, was on MSNBC, MSN now, but she is, she's a podcaster now, and she filed suit saying that that statute we've talked about many times is not complied with.
the Epstein Transparency Act.
Correct, which was effect, I think, signed into law November 19th of last year. And we've talked about this pretty much every week. The attorney generals ignore it. They're improper, improper redactions. They don't even file the reports showing what the grounds are. But if you look at the statute, and I've encouraged, I know you have too, our listeners, it's only about a 10 or 11 page statute. And this all should have been done by December 19th. So they just do not care. And so this is the first case where the court has said, yes, you're going to have to comply with this. And I think the compliance deadline is in a matter of days from now. Now, I'm sure that Blanche and company will appeal this decision, which was an injunction, but it's a first step toward a broader attack on the fact that they're ignoring that clear statute. And again, I want to remind our viewers and listeners, Gary, this was not a small, a battle. It was a bipartisan effort. There was only one House member out of Louisiana. I can't remember his name, but everyone else voted for it. There wasn't even a vote in the Senate.
It was just unanimous consent.
Exactly. Yeah. And Trump knew at that point. So Trump signs this bill into law on November 19th, 2025, and they just completely ignore it. And there's a reason for that. And we know the reason is, and there, for example, one of the things that was addressed by this judge is there's a 13-year-old who's given credible testimony about being assaulted by Trump, not Epstein, Trump. And by the way, Epstein's secretary of 10 years testified a few weeks ago in Congress and clearly disputed Trump's allegation that he stopped any contact with Epstein around 2005, 2006. Her testimony was it went on well beyond that as late as 2011. So there's a lot there. But again, a theme I would argue, and we've said a week after week, Gary, is Epstein is not going to go away. And so we'll see what happens with this appeal. But again, the federal district judges are the ones that seem to be stepping up and not just allowing this cover up, which is what this is. This is nothing more than a cover up.
Yeah. What Katie Fang did in her lawsuit was she delineated specific things that they had not complied with and said, I need this information in order to do my job as a journalist. And the law clearly requires them to provide this information, and they're just stonewalling. They're just not doing it.
Yeah, they
and so
redacted.
somebody needs to enforce it, Judge. And the judge said, you know what, you're right. I mean, if you have a law and you don't have any kind of remedy, then what's the purpose of having the law? So they went ahead and have ruled and ordered the Justice Department to unredact things and do what that law said.
Another example was there were parts of the documents in a different language, and the statute requires that they be translated into English. Those very basic things, but it's protecting not just Trump, but these other people that were just had their names deleted. On top of that, there's a violation, Gary, as we've talked about many times here, of names and information that should not have been released as to victims. So all the way around, it's been a complete thumbing their nose at this statute. And, there needs to be accountability. Again, I keep harping on this election coming up, but if we can get control of one or both houses, there's going to be accountability.
Yeah, we've basically taken Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney, under our wing on this show because she's speaking truth to power. She was fired from the Justice Department when she refused to approve allowing what's his name, Mel Gibson, to get his gun rights back. Because he had not been vetted and had a history of other mental issues and other things that were concerned to her. Let's hear what we call our weekly rant from Liz Oyer.
The way federal law enforcement is handling the investigation of Alex Preddy's killing is highly unusual, and I want to explain why. As in the case of Renee Good, the Justice Department has refused to investigate Alex Preddy's killing. This is highly, highly abnormal. Normally, if a federal agent shoots a civilian, DOJ conducts a federal civil rights investigation. The FBI, which is part of DOJ, would take the lead in gathering all the evidence, interviewing all the witnesses, and reconstructing exactly what happened. Prosecutors from DOJ's Civil Rights Office would then decide whether to bring charges. But none of that is happening here. Instead, Alex Preddy's death is being investigated by the Department of Homeland Security. Yes, the same agency that ICE is part of. This is a problem for several reasons. First, it's an obvious conflict of interest. Essentially, DHS is investigating itself. Second, this is not the type of investigation that DHS normally handles. It's not what their officers are trained to do, and it's not clear they even know how to do it. Third, DHS cannot prosecute cases. Even if they wanted to, they don't have the legal authority. So the whole thing is a sham. Because there is no serious federal investigation, the state of Minnesota is trying to do its own investigation. They have every right to do that. But as in the case of Renee Good, federal authorities are making that very hard. Normally, we would see close cooperation between state and federal law enforcement. But here, the feds are trying to box out the state. They're denying Minnesota police access to key evidence, such as Alex Preddy's cell phone, the gun, ballistics, and body camera video from the ICE agents involved. Minnesota has filed a lawsuit asking a federal court to intervene, and over the weekend, the court did something pretty extraordinary. Judge Eric Tostrad, a Donald Trump appointee, entered an order prohibiting federal authorities from altering or destroying evidence related to the shooting of Alex Preddy. The reason this is extraordinary is it shows that courts have lost all confidence in the credibility and integrity of the leadership of DHS, the FBI, and DOJ. It should not be necessary for a federal judge to remind officers of the United States that they cannot destroy or tamper with evidence. But that's exactly what Judge Tostrad did here. At a hearing on Monday, a lawyer for DHS swore that they're doing everything by the book. But then the judge asked if they would commit to preserving all the evidence and sharing it with state authorities. And here's what the lawyer said. I don't know the answer to that. That is not what the judge wanted to hear. So now he's considering whether to grant any further relief to the state of Minnesota to make sure that they can conduct a full and fair investigation. I will keep you posted.
Yeah, and this is a continuing theme because yesterday, John Brennan, the former CIA director, who's also on Trump's enemies list, filed a lawsuit himself asking a court to preserve all of the documents that the Trump administration has that would tend to show that they're trying to prosecute him, vindictively. And this is something that we never had to worry about before with, things being flushed down the toilet and burned in fireplaces and, all of that. But in Trump, the first administration, there were stories about his chief of staff burning things in a fireplace in the White House. So the corruption is staggering. And these were, in the case of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, these are two American citizens who were killed. And if there was an excessive use of force used, that should be investigated. And why are they stonewalling it? Because they just want to run roughshod over everybody and everybody's rights.
Gary, remember the band Three Dog Night?
Yeah.
They had a hit song called Mama Told Me Not to Come. And there's a line in there, I seen some things I ain't never seen before. The thought that in Minnesota, there'd be that not only would the federal government not be helping the state agencies, they would be getting in the way. And by the way, keep in mind, people forget about this. Kristi Noem, one of the reasons he was fired was because she flat out lied about what happened in terms of those specifics. But Minnesota is stepping up. One of the things I'd want to say too about this, Liz Ori being the pardons attorney. Let me give you another example. I can't. These facts are incredible, and I just want to keep sprinkling the audience with this. May of last year, Trump pardoned a guy named Paul Walzak, who stole millions of dollars, $4.4 million from he owned a nursing home, and he stole $4.4 million. He He was convicted. We're not debating this. He was convicted. He went to jail for 3 weeks. His mother paid Trump $1 million. Paul Walzak, who was, and with that $1 million pay per play, within 3 weeks, he was given a full pardon by Trump, which included, and we've talked about this before, no restitution. So these poor employees of this nursing home were making nothing, who had $4.4 million stolen from them. They don't
get the money back.
They don't get the money back.
No.
So, I love how these people, some of my MAGA friends, I've got Trump derangement syndrome. All I'm conveying to you are what the facts are. This is a convicted felon. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. Should a Republican MAGA say, "Oh, it's fine. We don't really care if these victims who had that much money stolen from them, and you can buy your way out of this." And that's all that's happened here. Complete corruption. And it's just ironic that Liz Oyer, who was the pardon attorney, was improperly fired, by the way. And you're right, it was tied to this Mel Gibson shenanigans. But it's going to change. It's going to require that we win in November. And we're just, I had coffee with my son this morning. He's 28. I just said, it's a tough time right now. And he knew I was coming over for the show. I said, all we can do is speak truth to power. And these are the facts. We're not here. This isn't fun.
No.
I'd rather be talking about Gator football with you, Gary.
Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, who wrote the book Regime Change, were talking. They spent months and months inside the White House, interviewing people and watching what was going on. And they recount that the president walks around all the time saying, I'm immune. I'm immune. Because the Supreme Court gave him immunity, and he's taken it to the bank, baby. All right. Well, it's time for a break, and we will be back in a few minutes with more of what conservatives never want to talk about.
Check out the Randall Jenkins Real Estate Hour every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m., where Randall will help you with things like down payment assistance, real estate tips, how to use AI to enhance your real estate experiences, real stories about real estate, nightmares, and triumphs. Also taking your phone calls and much more. That's the Randall Jenkins Real Estate Hour every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
Republicans claim that trickle-down economics, the theory that tax breaks and financial benefits for the wealthy and corporations will naturally trickle down to benefit the working and middle classes, actually works. Democrats counter that trickle-down economics is not the economic solution Republicans claim it is. Critics point out that historical economic data demonstrates that tax breaks and financial benefits for the wealthy and corporations do not create jobs, do not benefit the economy, do not reduce unemployment, and don't appreciably help working middle-class families. According to the critics, tax reductions for the rich are frequently directed to stock buybacks, dividend payouts to stockholders, or increased wealth hoarding, all leading to wider income and wealth inequality. Don't take my word for it. You have access to the internet. Fact-checking is your responsibility. Ask the artificial intelligence experts, does trickle-down economics work? Then, with the facts in hand, think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Voice of Reason. I'm Gary Gibbons, and my co-host is Kevin Carey. And I don't know if you saw, Kevin, J.D. Vance decided to go out to the Nixon Library and do a speech, sitting in a chair and waxing nostalgically about how he thought Watergate was just a nothing burger. So let's hear what J.D. Vance had to say.
If Watergate happened tomorrow, it would be like a 12-hour news story. Like, the idea that it would have taken down a presidency is crazy. And by the way, if you look at the story of how the deep state took down Richard Nixon, it's not all that different from what the same groups of people, the same institutions tried to do to Donald Trump in the first Trump administration. There is a parallel. I also just, at a personal level, young senator, vice president, writes some best-selling books, is hated by the media. It kind of sounds like J.D. Vance. So I'm a little, I've always liked Richard Nixon.
Well, I like his revisionist history, and he's right. I guess compared to the corruption in this administration, it's like a misdemeanor. I mean, that was the most corrupt administration until now. Yeah. But to somehow suggest that there was nothing to that, obviously, that's an ignorance of history. Now, if Nixon had come clean, but there was people went to prison for this. This wasn't political. These people went to court. You remember John Sirica was one of the judges. But Nixon, was a corrupt president, but nothing compared to Trump. But I'm not quite sure what Vance was trying to achieve by trying to revise history.
Well, he refers to the deep state, and he says that the deep state is what's trying to tear down Trump, and that it tore down Nixon. No, it didn't. It wasn't the deep state. It was actually Republican senators on the committee that were sending the message to him that we're going to uphold the law. What you've done is corrupt, and we're going to impeach you if you don't resign. And they basically, for a change, stood up and said, no, this is corrupt, and we're not going to stand for it. So,
and by the way, various people went to prison. Attorney General John Mitchell went to prison. John Dean, counsel for the president, Haldeman, Ehrlichman,
all of them.
They were convicted. This wasn't some political hack job. This deep state, I don't even know what that term means, other than it's a meaningless term to me. But again, I'm not sure what his point was in terms of trying to minimize those crimes.
Yeah, and if anything, it is a lesson for the folks that are around Trump today that are enabling him to do all the corruption that he's doing. You mentioned Haldeman and Ehrlichman; they were chief of staff and worked in the White House with him. And John Dean was his White House counsel, and the Attorney General. They all went to jail. So. While the president likes to go and talk and mumble, I'm immune, they are not immune. And there will be a reckoning for the people that are breaking the law. So, JD, go back to school and learn your history. Next, we want to hear from a rising star in the Democratic Party, John Ossoff. Who is doing a wonderful job in highlighting some of the corruption of the Trump family.
There's this beautiful little island off the Albanian coast called Sazan, and Jared Kushner wants it. So he took his Saudi billions and he decided he and Ivanka would buy the island and build a luxury resort. And then, like clockwork, just a few weeks after Trump wins a second term in the White House, Albania's prime minister grants Jared's company strategic investor status. So permitting and approvals are expedited to help the American prince develop his new island. Now, this island is an Albanian national treasure, some of the last pristine coastline in the Mediterranean. Its waters were a national marine park protected from development until Albania changed the law to let Jared Kushner build his resort. And it turns out, Savannah, that ordinary Albanians are not fans of this arrangement. There are right now massive national anti-corruption protests, like tens of thousands of people in the streets of the capital, Tirana. They're calling it the Flamingo Revolution, all sparked by opposition to Jared Kushner's land deal. Now Albania's anti-corruption police are getting involved. They froze a bank account controlled by two of Jared's investors, both Syrian billionaires. Now, do you think Jared Kushner would get special island buying privileges if he weren't the president's son-in-law? And isn't he supposed to be doing diplomacy, not shady land deals? And it's not just Jared. Listen to this. the son of the other Middle East envoy, is raising billions from the Emirates for the president's crypto business, while the president grants the Emirates the rights to our most sensitive technology. Your tax dollars are backing a Trump family tungsten mine in Kazakhstan. They are literally the elites they pretend to hate. The same folks who tried so hard to cover up the Epstein files. And listen, here's the bottom line. If you're involved in any of this, next year, you'll be raising your right hand and swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, in front of the United States Congress.
You know, I love to analogize. I'm a baseball fan. Jim Palmer, who's in the Hall of Fame, there was a saying that if you better get to him early. Ossoff, if you wanted to knock him off, they should have knocked him off before, you know, he beat an incumbent in a special election back in 2021. He's become a rising star, as you mentioned, and he speaks very eloquently. That, you know, I think a lot of Georgian Republicans thought they could knock him off. It's not going to happen. The you know, they have these betting pools. It's you know, it's money. People bet. It's not just a poll, and the betting pools have him an over 80% chance of winning that race. So Ossoff is going nowhere. And he speaks, you know, to this corruption. I keep saying the same thing, Gary. Does any of this bother any of these MAGA Republicans? These should not be These should not be partisan issues. This is corruption, and it should go across both lines. And there needs to be some legislation enacted. And I mentioned a few months ago, you know, after Watergate, there was some legislation back in the 76, 77 timeframe when Carter came in after Ford. To address some of this corruption, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you should not be getting rich, or should your son-in-law. Trump now has his new plane, by the way.
You know, he trotted it out yesterday, and they're riding, with his kids on it and in full display.
No one mentions two things there. There were two. He talks about how old that plane was. There were two planes in production to replace. Number two, the millions of dollars spent on that plane that came in that at taxpayer money.
There are two new Air Force Ones that are under construction now. The two that we have now are fine and serviceable and have worked well for every president except Trump. But yet he gets this free plane, so-called free plane, worth $400 million that had been for sale for years that nobody wanted. But now the Qataris decide that, hey, we see how much this guy loves this thing, and we'll give it to him, and we'll get all kinds of favors. And he says it's a gift, and it's a gift to our country. It's not a gift to the country. He intends to take that plane with him, like Ronald Reagan took an old version of Air Force One with him, and he's going to fly around in it for the rest of his life. He's not going to put it in his library. He's going to use it, and we're spending $400 million to try to retrofit it and to see if there are any bugs in it. For God's sake,
Yeah, reporters asked Trump about that. He kind of blew off that question, and it's grifting, it's corruption at a scale we've never seen before.
Yeah. Speaking of which, there's a bridge. We always have a bridge to nowhere, and this is literally one. The new Gordie Howe International Bridge is a state-of-the-art bridge paid for solely by Canada, by the way, that spans the Detroit River between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. But even though it's complete and it's ready to be open to traffic, it hadn't been opened because it takes an approval from the president to say, that's fine, you can come into the United States. And because the Trump administration is blocking the bridge opening. And let's see if we can figure out why that might be happening. Well, first, as I said, the bridge was financed primarily by Canada after the U.S. government declined to pay its share. So Canada said, okay, well, you welched on it, but we'll go ahead and pay for it all because it's a major commercial thoroughfare between the two biggest trading. They're the biggest trading partner we have. And so, it's needed. So it's intended to compete with, guess what, a privately owned bridge called the Ambassador Bridge. The Maroon family owners of the Ambassador Bridge have opposed the new bridge for years because it threatens their toll revenue. You know, it's a pay-to-play bridge to get from Detroit to Windsor, Ontario. And the only way that you've been able to do that is through this bridge owned by this family. So reports from multiple news organizations said that Matthew Marone met with members of the Trump administration and donated $1 million to the Trump-aligned super PAC shortly before Trump publicly threatened to stop the bridge from opening.
He met with Commerce Secretary Ludnick, our good buddy Ludnick.
Yeah, so Democrats in Congress have requested investigations into whether those contacts improperly influence government actions. Those investigations are ongoing and no official finding of wrongdoing has been made yet. But despite the controversy, the bridge's opening has only been delayed while the U.S. and Canada resolve outstanding issues. It's important to distinguish between the established facts, the donation, the lobbying, the meeting with administration officials and Trump's public opposition to the bridge, and then the subsequent delay against the allegations that the donation or lobbying directly caused the administration's actions.
Well, this is, again, it's paper play, and it happens within days, sometimes within hours. And again, we need to get the Democrats in power, but these Republicans shamefully, their silence is deafening on this. This is corruption. And the only way it's going to be examined at all, and again, accountability, you should not be, paying $1 million to meet with either Trump or the Commerce Secretary or some other cabinet member, and all of a sudden, the game changes to the detriment of taxpayers. This isn't Trump and his flunkies, Gary, playing with their money. This is costing us, like you just mentioned, hundreds of $1 million. To retrofit this plane that has been being given to Trump. This is real money. This isn't his money. They're making, Trump and his family, they're making money off of taxpayer money. That should bother Republicans as much as it bothers Democrats.
David Letterman famously used to do his top 10 list every night, and so we have a top 10 list of Trump campaign promises that he has completely ignored. Number 1, I will release all of the Epstein files. Number 2, will give the U.S. 5% annual economic growth. I guarantee it. Starting on day one, right? Always, everything starts on day one. He would never sign a budget that isn't balanced. So as a result, he hasn't signed a budget. Number 4, would work so hard he would never leave the White House. He's played golf 371 times. Number 5, he'd release his tax returns upon completion of the audit. It's been 10 years now. Number 6, he would repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act and create a system that would provide better health care at a lower cost to all Americans. I guess we're still waiting on that one. Number 7, energy prices will be cut by 50% in 12 months. 18 at the most. Now they're up 50%. Number 8, no more foreign wars. How's that one going? Number 9, ballroom will be paid for by donations, solely by donations. The latest is it's going to be $1 billion. Number 10, Mexico would pay for the southern border wall. We're still waiting on that one.
Promises made, promises kept, apparently.
Yeah.
In some parallel universe.
Yeah. How about promises made, promises ignored? The election is rigged unless I win. The news is fake unless it's flattering. Everything's a hoax unless I tweet it. Nepotism is bad unless it's my kids. I'm rich, but you can't see my tax returns. I'm smart, but you can't see my transcripts from school. I'm a patriot, but I dodged the draft. I'm successful, but all my businesses failed. My staff is the best, until I fire them. I'm innocent, but I refuse to testify. So why our friend Ed, who's taking a well-deserved vacation, says that there are 5 reasons for Donald, Crooked Donald, as he calls him, 5 reasons for the Crooked Donald presidency. Number 1, avoid prison. Number 2, retribution. Number 3, steal money. Number 4, remove brown people and make America white again. And number 5, build monuments to himself. After Crooked Donald is gone and the Epstein files are finally released, the nation will disassemble all of the monuments he will have built to himself.
The corruption, beyond the fact that you're right, none of what he promised is accurate. I'll give you just one more quick example. I know we're running out of time. People within that circle were placing bets on war-related activity. There was $950 million made when oil prices would fall. And there was insider knowledge of a ceasefire. So people with inside information about this made over $950 million. This is just something that the average person should care about. They're aware that, for example, in that situation, they had inside knowledge of a ceasefire and that oil prices would, so they bet on this, that oil prices would fall, and then they made money. This is pure insider trading, which the average person doesn't have access to.
Right.
That shouldn't bother you just because you're a Democrat. It should bother you because of what's fair and what's just.
Yeah, and he made 3,700 stock trades in a month, and all at the time when he's making these decisions that affected, and none of those were losers, by the way. That's why when he released his financial disclosure this week, he made $2.2 billion in 1 year, his first year in the presidency. That's just obscene.
Well, he with a straight face, he acts like he's got a blind trust, which he doesn't have, and he's directly involved in those amount of trades. That's exactly right. But if you listen to him when he talks to reporters, I have no involvement in any of this.
So you mentioned earlier a presidential pardon for, that resulted in, $4.5 million not being paid back to people. Guess how many, during their first year in office, how many pardons Presidents Clinton, Obama, Baby Bush, and Biden issued during their first year in office? 0. In Crooked Donald's first, he pardoned just one person, Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio. But in his first year of his second term, Trump pardoned roughly 1,600 people. Among those who've received pardons or commutations from the president in his second term include former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, former Congressman and serial liar George Santos, the reality TV stars Todd and Julie Crisley, billionaire finance founder Changping Zhao, former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted of importing some 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S., Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the online black market Silk Road, the actor Mel Gibson, who got his gun rights reinstated. These are just the high-profile recipients of Trump's presidential mercy, but he's also pardoned 1,500 of the January 6th defendants, including one who sprayed a police officer with bear repellent and another who shocked an officer with a taser so many times that it gave him a heart attack. Presidents offering clemency at an unprecedented rate. Nothing on Trump's scale has ever happened in any point in American history, and it's created an entire pay-to-play economy for pardon seekers and their families. They're shelling out millions of dollars to lobbyists and consultants who tout their connections with the president in hopes of seeking a pardon. It's just unbelievable.
Does any of that bother you? That you could pay $1 million, you can have your mother pay $1 million, get a full pardon. You've been convicted, incarcerated, and yet $4.4 million of restitution goes away. Just case after case after case. Just utter corruption, Gary.
Well, it's time for our quote for the day, and I thought we should use one from Abraham Lincoln in honor of the 4th of July. And he said, if the policy of the government upon vital questions is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers. Join us next Thursday from 9 to 11 a.m. when our special guest will be former Senator Jeff Brandes, and we will do a deep dive into the proposed constitutional amendment that Governor DeSantis and the legislature have put on the ballot in November to reduce property taxes. And you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn about all the things that the legislature didn't think about and why it's going to be a disaster for the state of Florida if it passes. Now stay tuned for the latest news from Fox Fake News. And remember, if any of the statements that you hear seem too implausible to believe, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.